For those that don't know me, my name is Richard Young, and I'm the Managing Director at Sicon. And Matthew Britcher, who's on camera, hopefully you can see him as well. He's Product Manager for the Projects and Construction modules.
Morning, everyone.
If you haven't met him before, he's the man who's in charge of all the developments that are going on with those two modules. Just to explain what we want to try and cover today, a little bit of background on the evolution of both projects and construction. We didn't sit down and suddenly decide to write a construction module, which in hindsight might have been an easier thing to do, but it's not quite how things usually work out. So we'll talk a bit about that, where it came from and what we were trying to achieve. Then we'll go through and make sure you're aware of all the functionality that's available in the latest versions. Certainly along the way, we've realized that we've overcomplicated some areas of both projects and construction in terms of postings and things. So we're going to explain what we've tried to do to make those things a bit simpler. Matt's going to give a reasonably detailed demonstration, including looking at nominal postings and balances and things in projects and construction, just to see how the whole thing integrates together. All right, so the purpose of this event really is really to make contact with our partners and our end users, and ultimately, hopefully what you'll see will give you some enthusiasm, encouragement to get upgraded to this latest version. But we also want to get your feedback. So we had considered, pre-COVID, we were planning to run some events, probably in Loughborough, somewhere in the middle of the country, and we could all get together and do a workshop. But I think pretty much everybody now has got used to doing these things on a Teams call, and you probably would agree it's probably almost as convenient. Some of the topics to discuss, obviously we're going to go into history in a moment, but things that we'll be covering are controlling postings to nominals, revenue recognition, visibility in the projects, applications, retentions. I don't know if everybody knows that we've got supplier application ledger, subcontract purchase orders, RCT in there as well. Matt's going to go through some bits and pieces with phases, stages, and activities in terms of breaking down your projects as well. Cost and revenue at completion and CVRs. And again, some of you may not know there's actually a plant hire module for hiring in plant and controlling that stuff within the projects module as well. So the very first module that we created, and I'm pretty sure, I was trying to find out exactly what the date was for the first bit of code we wrote for this, but I think it's about 20 years ago, which is quite scary. Sage had just brought out what they called MMS. So this was the first, I think it may not have even been SQL at that time, the first Windows version after Sage Line 100, for those of you that remember that product. And when they brought that out, there was actually no job costing. So they had a job costing module in Sage Line 100. They didn't have one when MMS came out. And we had some clients who were just desperate to get onto a Windows platform. So we created a job costing module for a couple of clients. I suppose I should explain. Back then, we were actually a Sage business partner. So we were selling Sage, implementing Sage, much like a number of you guys that are on the call at the moment. So this was for a client that was absolutely desperate to get off of the DOS environment that was Sage Line 100. So it was designed as a very simple costing module. They wanted to link up purchase orders, invoices, stock issues, that type of stuff. So, we literally just flagged transactions in stock, picked them up on a report, and it was lovely and simple. There was no nominal integration. There was no reconciliation to worry about, but it kept everything together on a single inquiry screen, and gave them what they needed. CIS, I did find some correspondence, and I think it was actually 2011. So again, this was an existing customer of ours at the time for Sage 200, or MMS, that was probably as well back in the day. And they just wanted some way of controlling their purchase invoices they were processing for subcontractors and creating some deductions for CIS. So we helped them with that. We effectively, as we still do now, raised a credit note for the deduction and left it in a little table so they could check it through, and they were still doing manual submissions to HMRC. So over the years, obviously that's evolved quite significantly. We added the HMRC integration, and since then as well, for any Irish customers, we've also got RCT that we've introduced into that as well. I forget the numbers, but there are several hundred. I think it's maybe up to 300 clients running CIS at least. So it's very well established now. Then, of course, we get into applications, valuations, and retentions. All those little things in the construction world that people who come into the market and think they can deal with construction, if you don't understand and get your head around these things, then they're really not a lot of use. And I think it took us a little while to get ahead. Well, me, maybe Matt, you're more intelligent, so maybe that's a bigger thing. But certainly, these cumulative billing things, like, what are you talking about? You raise an invoice and then you get paid for it. It's not quite like that, is it? So it took us a little while to get our head around applications, and then the valuation of those applications, and then what the current balance is and what you've applied for on this particular application, and balances today, and all those types of things. And then, of course, bringing in retentions. So what we did initially is we gradually created separate ledgers for these things, and they weren't connected with any nominal postings. They were just a way of processing an application, keeping them in a list, so we could create our cumulative balances per project, and then you could reconcile them off and make a nominal posting at the month end to your control accounts. That was, again, it all started off nice and simple. Then we had receipts. Obviously, we want to know, well, what's been paid, what hasn't been paid. So we introduced receipts into the applications. So we made it so you could process receipts in. And of course, at the time, you think, well, there'll be a receipt in for each application. But in reality, as life shows, that's not quite how it always happens. And also, people still were posting their receipts to the sales ledger against the invoices and not putting them through against the application. So we were losing those figures. So we have all sorts of real life things that make life a little bit more complicated because we are working inside of that Sage environment. Next thing we had to address really is subcontractor applications. So we effectively created a new ledger in the construction module where you could store your subcontract applications where they were awaiting valuation. Now, we also have some integration into our WAP, our web-based system for these applications, so they can go out to a QS. They can be checked, valued, comments put on about them about how much they're prepared to value and why, if they're going to reduce that value back. And then once they're approved, the certificates can be printed out and either self-billed to the purchase ledger, or they can be held waiting the invoice to arrive, and then they can be matched off. But of course, that then evolves, and then we need to really give contract balances to the subcontractors. So then we introduce a subcontract purchase order. So this enables you to effectively create a contract, create lines for labor and materials, depending on what you need, and then be able to raise applications or process applications against those to see where you are actually at for any project, for any element, on a running, rolling basis, cumulative basis. So we talked about nominal postings. So originally there were no nominal postings. It was all nice and simple. But I think one finance director said to me, he says, "I get it. It's quite nice keeping it separate, but unfortunately, I'm the finance director, and those guys are doing the processing, and there's a chance that they might forget, and I don't really want that responsibility. So please, can you make it automatic?" So we took that on board and started introducing nominal postings for applications and retentions and everything else that we were doing inside of construction. So that's been an evolving exercise, but certainly now I think, Matt, we have that pretty well covered, and Matt's going to cover that in some more detail in terms of exactly what that means. At the same time, in projects obviously started earlier, but has evolved along the way and become far more complex. I mean, it changed from job costing to projects at the request of our business partners because it had so much more functionality in it. So name change is also quite an awkward thing to do, but we got that through. But we also got to the point where we are 100% reconciliation between transactions that happen in projects and transactions in the nominal. And I know it's such an important thing in construction to make sure you have nothing that goes through and gets processed to the nominal without it hitting a project to give you accurate figures and accurate balances. It's really quite a critical thing. And I won't say it took us a long time to understand that, but it's quite difficult when we're interacting with Sage and some of the things that Sage tries to do, and breaks the links between the modules. So it's been a bit of an evolution, that one, to make sure that we can never miss anything. The things that then make life difficult as well are adjustments. So you put an application on, you stick a second application on, and then you need to make some adjustments to them. Some people just reduce their applications. Others have to have a credit, effectively a negative application on there, because audit adjustments, or if they're invoice financing, they need to see evidence of those things that have gone in. Then people want to change valuations after the event. We get misposted receipts that need to be reversed out. And because we've got nominal integration, all these adjustments that go on need to make nominal postings and correct them. We fell foul a couple of times in here of making adjustments in different periods and having some impacts in the P&L. So apologies for that. These are, things we've tripped up along the way, but we're trying to get those nominal postings happening. Things we've done now, we keep those on balance sheets so they're away from the P&L, and the impact is reduced or eliminated. Actually, we then created a bunch of reconciliation tools. So just to make sure on a once-a-month basis, you can go out and you can run these couple of reconciliation tools to make sure that you haven't got any nominal postings without a project, and you haven't got any projects without a nominal. Okay, so there's tools in there if anything happens, because there are things that could happen if you set up a new user in Sage and you forget to give them what are called the features for construction or projects. People can happily process transactions and not be prompted for a project or the other side of that transaction. So these tools let you create the other transactions or find the missing elements. Okay. Also, if you're starting a project and importing transactions, all those initial ones need to be marked as reconciled, because they are the opening balance transactions and won't necessarily have a balancing other side to them at that point. Something else we learned as well along the way. So we do listen. When posting an application, we used to post it in two parts. Effectively, we would post a retention element and the application. So £100 would be £95 of application and 5% of retention. But really, we learned that nobody's really interested in that part. The revenue is the revenue and the cost is the cost. And unless there's an adjustment in those retention figures, something is written off either on the sales or subcontract side, then nothing should ever change on the project. So we've taken those things away, and I think simplified the impacts on projects and reduced the number of transactions that you have to worry about looking at, trawling through, reconciling, etc., etc. So it would have been much easier. A lot of the other products that are on the market are outside of a finance system, so they don't have to try and fight with people doing other things in sales and purchase and nominal cash book ledgers. But I think the benefit of what we do is we've got, it's fully integrated. It's in one place. We can deal with the nominals. We can deal with the VAT. Everything is up to date in real time. And I think, accepting the evolution that we've been through, I think we have a very, very good solution that we ideally want to get you moved up to. But let's hand over to Matt.
Okay, so Richard's obviously taken over a little bit of the history and where we've come from, and really one of the main things we wanted to talk about today was the nominal posting changes and the evolution of that to hopefully make people's lives simpler. Okay, so why we felt like we needed to change it. Well, why do we do it in the first place? So it's that recognition of revenue and cost when an application comes in. Okay, so really we narrowed it down to two concepts. People either are recognizing that revenue and cost on application, or they're recognizing that revenue and cost when the invoice comes in. Okay, so back in the day, Richard mentioned there was no nominal postings, or there was the option to turn it on. And throughout time it was deemed that, well, if we're doing this, then we're essentially going to force people to do it in a certain way, and because when you suddenly turn on something halfway through a year and then you've got nominal postings coming out of nowhere, it made it even essentially more difficult to then go back and reconcile. So why have we changed it? So back when it was, what we were doing is we would make a nominal posting for every application change, amendment, valuation that went on, and it was set nominal codes where we would do a movement in and out. Okay, what we found was that it was difficult to reconcile, and there was potentially some unnecessary postings going on, okay, due to the volume of the changes that were happening. So I'm going to go back to our version 21 settings. So back then in version 21 of the product, we had the option to either post or not post. Okay. And then what we were doing is when an application would go on, we'd have an application sales and cost along with its control account. We would then move that balance to a valuation, sales or cost, and its current control account. And then we'd also do the retention movements as well. Okay. So what we were limited to when it was in the application stage, it was essentially posting to a single nominal. Whether that was being recognized on the P&L or the balance sheet, depending on when that final invoice was posted and the way that you would recognize that revenue. Okay, so that was post version 21. When we got to version 21, we can see that we removed that option there as an option, and we were essentially forcing users to use the nominal posting settings. Okay, and as you can see, we started to then move on and adapt the way of when retentions movements are made, whether we were writing certain areas off on the application, and essentially this list was growing and growing on where those nominal postings could go and the different variations. Okay, so this is essentially an outline of what the system was doing pre 21.1, which is the version that was released just before Christmas last year. And what we would get is this is from a sales side, an application would go on, we would recognize the sales value, and then we'd recognize the retention value, and that might go to a single nominal code for your application sales. Okay, so that could be a P&L code, single line. We would then post the debtors and the retention debtors at the same time. So when that was valued, we would then reverse that out and then put it back in again. Okay, so we've certified a certain value on that application. So we were doing a nominal movement to reverse it out of the application accounts and then essentially post it to the valuation account. And then when the invoice came in, we would essentially rinse and repeat, take it out and put it back in. Now, going forward to 21.1 and now our current release, which is going to be version 22, we've essentially given you the option now to slightly change the way that the invoice or those nominal postings are working. Okay, so we have an option to either recognize the value on application or we recognize the value on invoice. Now, if we I
think we've concluded, Matt, haven't we, that recognizing revenue on application seems to be the most commonly used way, and
yes,
and looking at HMRC guidelines, it's recognizing work done, which is application.
Yeah.
So there we go. We've got a thumbs up. So that is certainly the default, and that is certainly the way that we encourage. But we still have some people who go, no, we want to recognize it at invoice. Yeah. Now, I don't know if that in those cases is a lack of understanding of what HMRC is suggesting they should be doing. I'm sure some of them have their reasons, but anyway, we've taken out the option for valuation as well, which was also in there as a third complication to recognise it at that point. But really, application is generally invoice anyway.
Yeah, talking to sort of some of the customers, it's almost like that. You might get a QS that's going to over apply and get his hopes up, and then you could essentially be over recognizing your revenue because we know that's not a realistic thing. And I think that's kind of phasing out within the industry now anyway. With the people that you talk to, it's kind of more realistic and sometimes generally pre-agreed anyway. So what we're doing on what essentially I'm going to take you through is, again, as Rich has suggested, is our recommended setting, which is the recognizing value on application. So with here, we've drastically reduced the number of default nominal codes, and essentially all we're doing here is nominating which control accounts we are going to use. Okay, because what we'll find is now is we're going to be posting the gross application directly to the P&L. Okay, and those P&L codes they're the ones that are going to be specified on the application, which would have been the invoice, which would have eventually been the invoice in the old way. Okay, so going forward, our application sales is a single posting. So we post to the P&L once. and then essentially all our other movements as it goes through the certification is all done on the balance sheet, including our final invoice posting.
Sorry, I'm going to be a pain. I'm going to talk.
Yeah, no, you're good.
One of the things that I think was a really good improvement by doing it this way and setting this out is when we do that application sale, we can break that down by multiple nominal codes.
Yeah.
So you can recognise that revenue against different divisions, cost headings, nominal codes, elements within the nominal, without having to go back and readjust that later on. So again, hopefully simplifying down the processing, because you can define those nominal codes on the application, and that's where they'll get posted to and stay there.
Yes, and we only move it when adjustment is made to the application itself. That's the only time we ever affect that initial posting. Everything else is just done as movements between essentially control accounts.